Again, where we're at this point in time is we have, which in my opinion is the suspect detained in his vehicle, and we have the victim who, again, she's already admitted that she had to be de-escalated, that she gets angry, that sometimes she gets mean, and he's saying that she was upset, she was angry, and he was having to push her away. He didn't explain why, but that he was having to push her. He admitted to the pushing, and this always leads me to believe that this is not the first time that he has experienced domestic violence or perpetrated domestic violence. For all I know, he's the suspect in someone else's, he was the suspect in some other instance. But to be nervous about pushing somebody, typically they understand in Texas it would be offensive and provocative contact. If I don't want to be pushed and you push me, any kind of touching, it is a charge. And within a domestic, it is an arrestable offense in Texas, especially if it causes pain, because then it becomes bodily injury. But as of right now, that's kind of where we're at. I'm actually really impressed with how quickly this officer, because of his line of questioning, I think is tracking on that, which is why he asked about the scratches. It's why he's doing that. So at this point, this is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, he's doing a really good job of getting a lot of information out of them. With really, honestly, very few questions. There's very pointed questions.
And he's letting them talk.
And he's letting them talk and letting them kind of get what they need.
None of this was coerced. None of this was a lead. He didn't have to lead into a question. He's not having to pull it out of them. He is just getting a what would be considered a res gestae statement. This is an unprompted, hey, what happened? Everything that said past, she's crying and I'm here, is you explaining yourself. And that explanation is all perfectly usable in court.
Yeah, you don't need a Miranda warning for this.
You see, she got me with her phone. Can I see your hand? Oh, you got a mark right here.
Oh, that's from a wire.
That's from a wire? Yeah. You want to tell me about hitting that curb?
Hitting the curb was her grabbing the wheel.
She grabbed the wheel?
Yeah. She said, I can't believe we're getting pulled over, and then she grabbed the wheel.
What about the speed? Did she take over the...
No,
take over the pedal.
If I was going fast, I'm sorry. No, it's probably just the moment of, I'm still shaking now. The adrenaline, seeing the lights flashing up, and then her gripping the wheel. So if I sped up, I'm sorry about that. Or if I was speeding beforehand, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it took quite a bit to catch up to you. So,
yeah. I'm sorry about that. We're just going into the park again to get water because we have a 6-gallon water container to fill up. So we're just grabbing water for the hike. Okay. And we're just.
And notice he's letting him talk. Most of what he's saying now is not pertinent to his investigation.
Still to go for a hike.
Can you pause it real quick too? That also takes away his PC for the DWI. Or his reasonable suspicion for it. He said that she pulled on the wheel to jerk it, and that he said he was speeding because he was speeding. He apologized for doing it. Again, he would have known this already because he doesn't see any other indication of intoxication. I don't know, but that's my guess. Because to my understanding, I don't think he pursues it. My memory is I don't think he pursues it past that. But he's eliminating those aspects of that investigation so he can now just concentrate on the domestic. And when he puts it in his report as to why he stopped the car, he's going to mention that it was veering. He's going to mention that it was speed. Even just the speeding alone was PC to stop it. Now, if he doesn't have a radar or a LiDAR laser, and he's pacing the car, it's pretty weak PC. But the leaving the roadway, perfectly good violation. In Texas, it'd be considered leaving the roadway or failing to maintain a single lane. That's great PC for the stop. He's getting out of that aspect of it, but he's covering his basis for whatever report's going to be generated out of this, and now he's probably going to transition, I think, into the domestic. But he's covering his basis as to why they're still detained. So, I again, really good job of being a very efficient investigator on why all this stuff is happening. He's addressing all of his elements to the offense very quickly.
And the park ranger agrees. That's why he's giving him a thumbs
He's
up.
like, hey, man.
Hey, you're doing great, buddy.
Yeah.
No, sorry about that. Of course. Do me a favor. You want to go ahead and just take a seat right over here on the curb for
I like that. Sitting people down.
You don't have anything in
Keeps
my
people
pocket
from running.
like that, do you? Here. Nope. Just the wallet? All right. And then, do you mind lifting your shirt so I can check your waistband?
I like it.
Perfect.
So, pause it real quick. That was not a frisk, weirdly enough, or it was a very friendly frisk. He did touch him. Anytime you're touching somebody to kind of check a pocket, frisking is allowed to be cursory in nature. You're not allowed to grab and squeeze, but you can push and pat. Ask TSA; they probably know a lot more about it than we do. But I do like that he just simply had him, just so it's a the least amount of cursory search, he just had him lift up his shirt, because typically if you're going to conceal a firearm, it's going to be in the waistband. Just has him pick it up, take a quick spin. He can see it. He doesn't need to touch him. He doesn't need to get into worry about closing the gap. That's actually really good tactics. Again, I'm still really impressed with this officer whose body cam this is. He's actually doing a really good job. And then sitting him down, again, is increasing the time on that OODA loop, either for his backup officer to detain him, or to, again, maintain scene security. It's really, really great tactics, good, efficient investigating. So we'll keep going.
I just want to make sure, that's all, man. Go ahead, do me a favor, take a seat, all right? Oh, do you have your ID on you?
There it is. Get everyone identified, my guy.
Go ahead and take a seat.
Now notice he's pretty adamant about keeping him seated. Because again, he doesn't know victim suspect yet. He hasn't fully developed PC. He's got an idea. But until you know, because for all we know, he's got a murder warrant. Unironically. But these are things to kind of keep in mind. So we'll keep going.
What's your first name? Brian?
And instead of having him go back to the car and dig around for an ID, he's just doing it probably, which is good.
And then your last name?
Because, again, scene safety. There's no reason to get him to go back in that car if you don't need to.
D-R-I-E? Yep. Laundrie? Okay. What's your date of birth, Brian?
Do not lie if cops ask you to ID yourself. Don't ever lie. You're an idiot. Even if you were perfectly innocent on everything else, fail to ID is a stupid reason to go to jail. Don't do that ever. Just be honest. You don't have to tell them, again, you have Fifth Amendment rights. You don't have to tell them that you committed a crime. You can protect yourself from self-incrimination. But if someone is asking you to ID yourself, just do it. Because it's a dumb charge to pick. Every time I was like, bro, just give me your real name. It's not comp. I have to verify who you are because it's part of this investigation. No, most of the time it's just, I have to document that I talked to you. I interacted with you, and as a part of transparency in law enforcement, I, officer so-and-so, talked to this person at this time and detained him for this investigation. You want that documentation because if there is some level of misconduct, you want there to be record of it. Identify yourself. It's super dumb. I can't think of a single reason outside of being wanted for murder to not do it. And they're going to find out. Because if you make up some stupid name, they're going to find out. So.
I'll say crisscross applesauce. Can I just sit in the shade?
Crisscross applesauce.
It's okay. I'll give you some shade. Sound good?
I like that. That was clever. I'm going to give you some shade. I was like, no, you're trying to stay close enough to that guy to
don't get
keep
him
him secured.
I need a 29 name and date of birth.
Look at this guy using 10 codes.
First name, Brian.
I have a very strong opinion of Mr. Beard Guy here, but we're going to get to him later.
Mr. Beard Guy's the reason we're making this video.
I will address him later.
He's like 90% of the reason we're making
Seriously,
this
yeah,
video.
honestly. Like, I got halfway into this, I was like, this is just a traffic stop. And
Yeah, we're just like, I was bored scrolling by and just
Yeah.
watching whatever, and then, some stuff happened and we had to start over.
So, to be honest, as a backup officer, which this guy is the backup officer, he really should only be getting her ID'd and trying to establish whether an offense occurred. Really getting too far into asking questions, if you're not the one taking it or you don't want to take a supplement, don't do it. Because if you find something out, you now have to write a report for it. But also, if you're not the one doing the investigating, why are you asking questions? That's just an aside. Either do it because you're lazy and you don't want to do a report, or don't ask because now the person's going to have to repeat themselves, especially in the instance of a domestic. Let's say she was the victim in this instance. If it was something traumatic, you don't want to have her say it twice.
Mm-hmm. Re-traumatize your victim.
Exactly. You should really only have to get it. So you should have one officer doing as much Now, if they're a witness to something, that's different. You can take down their information, add a short little report that says, while I was helping this investigation, did something. But if this is a material party to the offense, you should probably let the handling officer make the investigation, unless you plan to take on this report or an aspect of it, the investigation. So.
And as we find out later, he absolutely did not want to do that.
This is, I have some real, anyways, we'll get to it.
All right.
India, Alpha, November.
So the primary officer is running the other party. The victim, in my opinion, at this point.
It's going to be out of Florida.
Of a domestic.
Did he hit you though? I mean, it's okay if you're saying you hit him, but I understand if he hit you. But
We can pause it.
Yeah.
She, apparently, we don't know this because I don't know that we have this backup officers. We'll call him a Mr. Beard. Mr. Beard has just admitted, or just said out loud, that she admitted to hitting our victim here. So now we have verbal admission of assault that caused visible bodily injury with someone that you're in a domestic relationship with. At this point, for me, just watching this body cam, you have probable cause for an arrest for domestic assault. Utah does have a shall arrest clause, and there's a few exceptions if you can really articulate a reason why. but it is a shall arrest. The
had
spirit of the law is to protect the victim from the suspect, which is why they want you to be arresting people.
And you had to dig for those exceptions.
Exactly. You have to dig. It's got to be something pretty special. And in this instance, I can't see it.
Yeah. We did some prep work. We'll be showing you all those. But
I don't think it's an inappropriate question to ask, well, did he hit you? It's important because maybe you're trying to establish that there's some level of self-defense, but without bodily injury,
mutual combat.
Again, but even in mutual combat, in a domestic, you have to ascertain if there was an aggressor.
Explain what mutual combat is, because that's one of my favorite things about Texas.
So Texas, and again, we're just I don't know. So Texas does have a clause where if you're not in a domestic relationship, if there's no other extent, like they're not like a senior citizen or something, like you have two of-age consenting adults that decide to fight and don't cause serious bodily injury, it's just considered mutual combat. You get a ticket maybe for fighting in public and they cut you loose. It's a Class C misdemeanor. And that's a discretionary ticket to issue. Theoretically, it's not an offense to pick a fight. As long as you both consent to the fight, as long as you both don't use weapons, and as long as you're both, I mean, technically you can have a duel in Texas and it's technically legal.
Yeah.
Minus, again, if the officer decides to take action because you're causing a disturbance. There's breach of the peace aspects of that they can really pull on. So if you go to jail for fighting, don't get mad.
Not a duel with weapons, though, right?
No. That's aggravated assault. That's a felony. Yeah, I'm talking fisticuffs. You can.
So you heard it here. Fight Club is legal in Texas.
Fight Club is legal in Texas as long as you're not breaching the peace.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is how fighting commissions actually end up working. You have to have a legal agreement showing that you're both consenting to the injuries and consent. That's why you're able to do boxing. Because if not, it's assault. Yeah. So, anyways, Texas does have mutual combat. I don't know what the law is in Utah, but we did look up the law in Utah for domestics, and it's very similar to Texas. Like I said, at this point, I really do believe he's got PC for the arrest, but I believe in doing a thorough investigation. We'll keep going.
Hit you? Because, where did he hit you? Don't worry. Be honest.
So right there, the captions didn't show, but she said he didn't hit me.
Yeah.
He did not hit me.
He didn't hit me. He grabbed me. He pushed me.
Yeah, it's a little hard to hear.
Which is reasonable. And again, when you're talking about an assault, if we're looking for reasonableness of, they have the same use of force continuum that cops do, is that if I'm being punched, it's not unreasonable for me to not want to get punched. I don't have to consent to getting punched. I can push, technically even punch back, if it's to stop that from happening. I'm in defense of myself. That's why it's called self-defense. So we'll keep going. She verbally admitted that he did not hit her. She was the only one that hit him. We've already established that there's bodily injury. To me, this is a pretty straightforward domestic, but we'll keep going.
You slapped your face or what? Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. So has he been drinking?
Still a reasonable question if it's a DWI investigation, but...
Oh, you're driving? Oh, he was driving.
Now, I don't...
Did you already tell him all this?
I didn't get that far into
Okay,
it. She was hyperventilating.
She's
a
saying
little
that
bit.
they don't drink,
Pause.
but at the point when you...
I just want to point out the level of awareness that primary officer here has. He's like, I'm not going to ask her questions until I feel like she's calmed down. It gives her the time to breathe and represent herself the way that she wants to represent herself. But also, it gives you a better... When you can put in your report, I gave her time to collect her thoughts and calm down. If she does articulate an offense and you do have PC for an arrestable thing, it works out better in the court of law. Don't ask somebody when they're all amped up. Now, if somebody's injured and I need information now because I'm trying to catch a bank robber, you got to tell that person to suck it up and put their big boy pants on. But the way that this guy is articulating everything he's doing, like, super, super cool. That's really, honestly, because he didn't say, oh, I just didn't ask. He actually had a reason to. He's like, well, she was hyperventilating. Yeah. Why would I interview her if she's that amped up? It's really good. It's very, very good police work so far. I'm actually really impressed with this guy.
So, quick question. Why would Beardy officer here not go and ask him, hey, But because he showed up and just started doing stuff
I
without
trust me.
having a lay of the land of
my complaints are already
what
ready.
had happened, who
We'll
had done
say,
what.
We'll say that they have a working relationship and understand that this isn't his first police call either. Because for all you know, that these guys have worked thousands of these calls. You don't know. Again, when I was on, if it was domestic, even if I'd never worked with that officer before ever, if I was stuck there doing nothing, I would find work. Let me at least get the people identified and get a gist of the story. And then when I reconvene so we can swap so she can interview the other party, I'll be like, hey, this is her ID. I already put her in the call. You know, she's clear. There's no warrants, no nothing. Do you want their CCH? I can pull that while you're interviewing. She said XYZ. I don't think we have PC yet. I can say that. That's not unreasonable. I'm not telling him what to do, but I did some level of investigation. But ultimately, again, if you're not going to do a supplement to the call, if you're not going to take some level of ownership in the investigation, you really shouldn't be asking questions because you might be potentially contaminating the investigation. They might ask, like, let's say his body cam wasn't on, right? And let's say that's the only time she ever verbally admits to hitting him. And then let's say he tells this cop something completely different. Well, why didn't you have it documented? Why did you have, even if there was no malintent there, you can have a possible issue. And again, this is why the advocates get pissed off. This is why people start to protest, all this kind of stuff. Why would you open yourself up to that liability if you don't need to? All of these little things you're going, again, what we're doing right now, we're after the fact, with hindsight, analyzing what's going on. As an officer, you have to be very conscientious that body cam is either absolving you or condemning you. And the public, you're still going to be subject to somebody else's opinion that has little to no understanding of your job. Judges have never stopped anybody. Defense attorneys and prosecutors have never had to do this. Your jurors have never had to do this and have no idea what you're experiencing and seeing. You have to be conscientious of that every single time you're conducting yourself in public. It's really why anytime, when you're a rookie, you just don't realize how the stuff plays out in the back end. But understand that you're going to be evaluated, so you need to be very careful and have a purpose for everything that you're doing, because if you don't, we're going to question it after the fact. It's what I'm doing right now. So we'll keep going.
Yeah.
You lit them up.
You don't drink or anything.
She started hitting.
Yeah, I was yelling at him, and then when you turned your lights on, I kind of punched an arm like this.
She's saying like hit the curb. You said it was Gabby?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wrote that. It's Gabby.
Okay.
Yeah, so here I'm guessing, I don't know.
She now verbally admitted to the primary officer that she hit him as well. We'll keep going.
Yeah. So the audio's off here for, I don't know, maybe I know.
It might be for personal info. He's running them on the
Tend to have a
radio.
lot of anxiety and stress.
I have a lot of anxiety.
And what's his name? Is it Brian? Is he usually pretty patient with you?
So do they do that? Does the audio get turned off during,
So it's to protect.
after the fact, I'm guessing? Like
yeah, so they redact certain information, especially if it's personal information, or if there's like a minor, or if I'm going into someone's apartment and like let's say I get into a fight in somebody's apartment, they might redact certain things from that because it doesn't need to be public information. Or, especially in this instance, there's now potentially a murder investigation going on for this. Some of that might be material evidence for that further investigation. They will redact that until they have more information, or just to protect the integrity of the investigation, they'll redact that stuff. But also, you have a right to privacy. The public doesn't need to know it unless they do some sort of freedom of information thing, and you can do that if a police officer is interacting with you. It's going to be public record, but the police department's voluntarily releasing this body cam footage. So because those people didn't consent and because there wasn't a freedom of information inquiry done, they're not under any obligation to give anyone else's personal information except for the people participating in the call. So they're doing it after the fact, though.
Gotcha. Sure. Yeah, I figured because I didn't see him block the glare.
Block the glare.
Yeah. But it just makes me upset. I know that he definitely gets frustrated with me a lot.
I'm wondering if this other guy doesn't have an earpiece in, so they might be getting radio traffic from Central, and that's protected information. NCIC information and stuff like that's pretty protected, so you wouldn't.
Gotcha. So it would be coming out of his actual radio as opposed to
His backup. I think the guy that's there actually has an earpiece. So we
yeah,
haven't heard
because
any of his
we don't
radio
hear any
traffic.
of his.
Wear an earpiece. If you're a cop right now, wear an earpiece.
And so this part right here is where I started to have a major problem, which is just like this dude seems to care more about being a therapist and trying to comfort her than actually doing any kind of police work or investigating.
And,
really.
and I can understand, like, if you're de-escalating or trying to build rapport or something like that, maybe I can understand this. But again, at this point, I think we have PC for an arrest. I don't see where they would argue that you don't have PC for arrest. If I'm the officer, if I'm Mr. Primary Officer. So again, these aspects of his rapport building are irrelevant. How does this help you come to a conclusion on her, and again, admitting that she's punching him, whether she's got anxiety or not, whether I don't care if it's, she says that, Jesus told me to punch him. You still did it. We're not going to convict Jesus for punching your boyfriend. We're going to convict you. So
and
this line of questioning does not go with any law enforcement objective, and this is really where I'm going to start to, like we said, this is kind of why we're doing this video in the first place, is this becomes very dangerous in law enforcement and investigating, because I don't know that this establishes or disestablishes PC. Because like let's say, were you afraid? That might be a good question to ask. Or what were you afraid of? Well, he said he was going to kill me. And again, given what happened after the fact, that'd be different, but that's not the questions he's asking. So it's not good investigating. And this is on Beard Guy. This is not on Primary Officer Guy.
Primary Officer.
Mr. Bodycam is still killing
He's still
it.
A-okay.
Yeah. And for all we know, maybe, because we don't know, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. Let's say he's that nice to everybody. Let's just say that's the case. It's inappropriate either way. To be fair, to be honest, at this point, she's the suspect in a domestic assault. But I would almost go and say, and we hear later a little bit more to why he's feeling that way.
Yeah, I had the very first instinct of it here because of the way he's talking to her and because of the way he's interacting here, that this had less to do, like, that there was definitely something at play here, and it kind of gets confirmed further on in the video with the way he talks about her and the way he handles this.
We look at the facts, not at who and not at we're looking at why and how. Everything else is immaterial. You have to, again, we called it procedural justice where I came from, and it was kind of like the beating drum that they did is we want to be procedurally just, which means it's through our standard operating procedures that we treat everyone the exact same. We treat everybody, we administer the law the exact same way, regardless of race, ethnicity, economic, socioeconomic things, all of those things, because that's the way it's supposed to be. And if you do that consistently, you probably gain trust within the community. This type of behavior, even though it's small, even though it's not illegal, is what gives people this idea, again, when they start to make arguments about systemic racism, when they start to make arguments about cops being bigoted or having some sort of bias, every example you give them gives credence to that idea. And so you have to be, like I said, very careful about what leaves your mouth. Very careful, because even if you have that bias, because everyone does. I truly believe everyone has bias. But if you are being paid to do a job and the responsibility and the oath that you took was to administer the law equally, it doesn't matter what your bias is. You need to act justly, and you need to act on behalf of your oath and on behalf of the obligation and duty that you have to the public, not on your own personal recognizance. And again, there's a whole other thing for politicians too. But for cops, it's a very real human interaction, because the consequences are sometimes, dire. So we'll keep going.
Situations you can get in. You know what I mean? And we're not here to be mean to you or anything. Well, there's a first time, and then it usually. We'll go see what Brian's saying, but I think you've heard everything now from.
Quick question. You said you were hitting him in the arm. Did you grab the steering wheel?
No, I didn't.
You did not touch the
I
steering
didn't
wheel?
touch the steering wheel, but only for like a second, because I just saw the lights.
So I did touch the steering wheel.
Only for like a second at the point where he hits the curb, which is kind of the whole.
That's kind of the whole point.
That's the whole point. And again, this is This is a perfect comparison in that encapsulation of those couple of seconds.
Yes.
Where you go from this dude who's like giving her advice and telling her about his wife and all this other stuff, and this officer who's like, let me clarify what you said and let me get...
Yeah, I need facts about this case. I am trying to figure out if I even need to be here. Do you need medical help? Do you need whatever? These are all material items to my investigation. If it's not that, I'm wasting your time. You don't get held hostage by the person asking for your car insurance, your car warranty. They don't get to hold you hostage on the phone. Same thing with law enforcement. If there's no law enforcement objective there, we don't need to be. We are wasting your time. is technically unlawful restraint at that point if you don't have a lawful detention. He still has one. He's still conducting an investigation, but again, primary officer here is very to the point and very specific about what he's asking and why he's asking. Everything he said thus far has pertained to the case and to his investigation. This isn't about anxiety and all this, which again are important things, but his primary objective here is to ensure that there's not crime afoot, as the law would say. So we'll keep going.
But did you grab the steering wheel and like swerve or anything like that?
No.
I just touched it.
Steering wheel at all.
I'm gonna go ahead and close this door again. Do you have enough air back here, or do you want me to kick it up some more?
I need water.
I will see if I can find some.
Okay, don't worry.
Perfectly reasonable. He's trying to make sure that there's no undue duress on her. I've done that plenty of times. If it's cold or hot or whatever.
No, we have the park rangers here.
Yes. Which I think look very sharp, by the way.
Which, okay, so one thing I do want to point out here, bringing it back to the cameras again, and kind of how the body cams are positioned here. If you'll notice, we're watching one feed from one officer. You've got now 3 officers here, 2 of whom, while we were watching these other 2 officers, have been apparently, I guess, talking to the boyfriend here, probably getting information that would be pertinent, probably getting a lot of, footage that would probably be pretty useful for us to know, and we are all making our assumptions and our decisions on what happened, how it happened, who's guilty here, who's the victim, who's the suspect, all of that based off of one feed. I always like to say that when you're a camera person, and this applies also to body cams, your world is this big.
Yep.
This is the only world you see. Everything inside that square is all that matters. You guys can't see outside of here. We got lights everywhere. We've got wires all over the place. You don't see that. The same way, you're not seeing what that officer's seeing. You're not seeing what the other officer is seeing.
And I will say this from it, and we mentioned this earlier about like you have to be careful about how you're conducting yourself, because you will be judged almost fully off of what that body camera sees. You won't be judged off of everything else. The term we like to use, the totality of the circumstances, is something that we used to drop in reports all the time. I'm having to ascribe sometimes things. The camera can't smell. That's one of the big things that it was like. I can smell alcohol in this guy's breath. It's so strong that even standing out in a field like that, people are that drunk that you can smell it. Or again, if I smell marijuana. So I need to be able to articulate all of these things. And this goes more into report writing, but understand that you have to understand the limitations of the hardware that you have, because ultimately, and I think he's doing a good job of doing this, is trying to get everything set on his body cam. Trying to make sure that all the statements are repeated so that his body cam can not only hear it, but also see it leaving the individual's mouths. You're not like, oh yeah, I totally hit him. You're actually seeing these things, because that's the only way it's going to stand up in the court of law. And so it's kind of, again, the limitation of body cams is it's not, just like anything, it could be manipulated, it could be redacted, it could be whatever. I'm really impressed, and I love that this police department had the presence of mind to come out and release it. And this is an hour and 17 minutes long. They said this is uncut. I had to take out some things to protect an investigation, but ultimately this will be fully available to people. And I think that's really good on the police department for doing it, and that's why body cams will help you. But again, it can really hang you on what you don't put. And again, even on the back end for when it goes to court, I've seen it where they redact portions of it. You'll have a defense attorney who says, well, I don't want him to see. We had a guy, he got shot at, and the only video that came out, they got rid of his body cam. I don't remember why they threw out his body cam. There's some guy at a fence line, had a camera, and all you see is this cop shooting a dude in the back. And you're like, wow, yeah, I'd hang that guy. That's a bad shoot. It's all you're thinking to yourself. Literally, right before turning that corner, that guy had turned and shot at that officer. But because they took it, they managed to redact that, because they got rid of that little bit of context that you had, you're hung. This is all of these things. And again, it kind of goes back into why law enforcement, I think, is such a tricky place to be in now. Is it's there's so many little things that you get. Ask a surgeon how much they get nitpicked after the fact if something goes wrong. Probably all the time. Liability for that's high. They have to have like $1 million malpractice insurance and stuff like that. Which again, shout out to lawyers that don't have to have that. You can get OJ off and be fine. You just make some money. So, but we'll keep playing.
Leave your comments about OJ below.
Whether he did it or not, vote below.
Yeah.
Listen on the notice that you had some marks on your neck.
He sees the bodily injury. beard
She's
guy.
got some marks on her too. We're just trying to
He's
figure
got
out
marks
what
on her?
happened.
Pause
You
it.
probably-
So I don't know because primary officer hasn't mentioned it yet, but I don't know that she actually has marks on her, but he mentioned it to try to refute that he's got marks on him. He's trying to make it sound like they both have injury. Now, that could be the case, but if my injuries are on my forearm and on my neck, which would be indicative of defensive wounds as opposed to my hands, and every other injury I have is like to my face and like to the inside of my palms and stuff like that, where the injuries are important. Just having them doesn't matter. Where they have them and how they affect whether or not an offense occurred is what's important. And so that's kind of, again, what frustrates me about Mr. Beard Guy is he just said you have them. He didn't say how they got there. He didn't ask how they got there. And again, both of these stories have already been put out there. Yes, I hit him. No, he didn't hit me. If she said he didn't hit him, maybe it was the seatbelt. Maybe it was just her resting her hand on it. That's kind of what frustrates me about his line of questioning or his comments in this investigation, because notice this isn't coming from the primary officer. So this is the beginning of my
There's a lot of
complaints.
assumptions Beard Officer here is making coming into this
Yeah.
that kind of play into how he behaves throughout all this, which is what I had a problem with as a civilian.
Story. This officer is probably going to be the one handling the whole case.
Yes.
Yeah, he is.
You want to listen to what he has to say, and then you tell him what happened.
He already interviewed
Start at
him.
the beginning for me.
Started at the beginning. Well, I don't want to go too far back, but we've been in Beyond Land for the past week or so, traveling around, and the flies here are pretty intense. So the flies have definitely been getting to her, and then my feet are dirty and everything. So I think that our little squabble started because we were hanging out at the coffee shop, and when we got back to the van, there was some dirt and stuff in the van, and I moved our food around. It was a little disorganized, so she gets a little.
So again, as he's talking, I can't smell anything or hear anything, but I don't see any sign of intoxication at all. The DWI investigation is super
That's
dead.
over, yeah.
It's super dead. It's just re-emphasizing that. He's also, I don't know that you have an argument for like any other type of intox. So you can talk about people like, does he do drugs? Does he do any of that? Without an indication outside of that, you can't assume. He could just have weird personality quirks. But at this point, he's articulating himself. I don't know. He's going to talk probably for a little bit more. We'll see if we skip through some of it. But he's just explaining the story as to how they got to where it is.
Yeah,
To me, he's trying to be thorough. He's trying to get the story on Bodycam. But again, the elements of the offense are, and maybe, again, I'm backseating this because I know. She hit him. He's got the injury. And there's no explanation. There's no good explanation for any injury that Beard Guy's claiming that she has. Outside of... there was never any claim that she was struck.
So I do want to ask something real quick, just because for one thing, I saw it in a lot of the comments on this video that we're watching, and it's also something that I kind of noticed at the beginning is when there's a lot of like nervous energy that's happening from him, which I mean he's being interviewed by the cops. So
anybody that's super comfortable getting interviewed by the cops is probably shouldn't be comfortable with being interviewed by the cops.
But I did want to ask about like is any of that indicative of anything to you? As an officer, former officer, would any of that be indicative to you of anything? Is it something that you'd be looking at? Is it something you'd be looking for?
So really, like, and this is where you get into the conversation about profiling. So technically, anytime you look at something and come to a conclusion, you're developing a profile. They literally have criminal profilers, that sit there and say, if I'm having a serial killing, who might this person be? This is, we'll call it micro profiling. Him being fidgety, maybe looking around, him being nervous makes sense. I mean, he's being interviewed. He understands. Like I said earlier, he made a comment about, well, I did push her, but I pushed her to get away from her. This might not be the first time that he's interacted with law enforcement for a domestic, or at least is aware, has been surrounded by that type of stuff. Being nervous is normal. He was kind of frisked for weapons, and so now if I hadn't frisked him and I knew nothing at all, that would make me know, why is he that jumpy? Or and if I need to ascertain if he's nervous because he wants to run. Is he nervous because he's thinking about assaulting me, or is he just nervous because he doesn't know the disposition of my call? You can't really draw. It's not fair to draw any conclusions simply based off nerves. Again, when she was just crying, if I said, well, she's crying, she must be the victim, I'd be wrong in that instance. She's crying because she's stressed out. He's fidgeting because he's stressed out. They're both expressing a heightened state of agitation because they just got into a domestic. It makes sense. Like, it's not unreasonable. If he was laughing the whole time, that's a little weird. You're in a domestic, you're being detained by the cops. Laughing is kind of an odd, or at least atypical. Again, somebody might be on the autism spectrum, and if they're fidgeting and moving, I touched them twice already, so I'm really ramping up their level of agitation. Maybe that's normal for them. Just because it's not normal to me doesn't mean it's not somebody else's normal. So to make that, to try to draw a conclusion from that's kind of baseless. There's no real law enforcement objective or even accurate statement or conclusion you can make based on someone's behavior alone. You have to contextualize why. And that's for anything. If not, you're just trying to make someone fit a description or trying to make somebody fit a criteria without any
preconceived
actual
notion.
That's what I'm getting at.
You know what happened
exactly
weeks later.
You can't. I guarantee you, if you walked up to a random person who elected to sit in the corner of a coffee shop and asked them a bunch of personal questions, they'd act just like that to you, even if you weren't law enforcement, because they're uncomfortable with the idea. If I stuck some random person in front of this camera, I'd have to talk to it. They would act very similar to that. They'd act fidgety or whatever. That's not an indication of guilt. There's not enough information surrounding that behavior to come to any sort of conclusion. So it's not. That's irrelevant. Anyone that isn't well experienced in doing investigations will realize that that's really irrelevant to anything. So we'll keep going.
Cool.
That's okay.
It's hot out here.
We were going to get water because we ran out, but it's okay. No, it's okay. I don't like plastic bottles. It's okay. Thank you, though. But we just had a little disagreement.
That caption was awful. He said plastic bottles, and it turned it into classic violence.
Wow.
All right.
Classic violence, baby.
Man. Auto-generated captions for the win.
There.
All right.
This agreement was just that she was getting a little worked up, and I was saying, no, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Offered him water. Look at it. Rapport building. I like it.
That's how they get
So
you.
it was just more
Don't
of a
talk to
disagreement, and
cops.
I
Don't
just
talk to
wanted
cops, yeah.
What was the disagreement about?
It was. I wouldn't even call it disagreement. It was just that I'm dirty and I can't change being dirty. Like, I got dirty feet. I got sand on my flip flops and stuff like that.
You probably skip that.
Yeah,
it was that we were
he's talking about being
coffee
dirty.
shop for so long because we were there from 9.
Yeah, a lot of this is just
So
kind of
you pushed
repeat.
her and she hit you?
She was.
Go back.
It wasn't like a push. Just give me a.
Okay, so you said you pushed.
He's trying to probably just get this person to give a complete story in case there's any reason that the argument might have. But honestly, the reason for the argument's irrelevant to the offense. The argument could be over butter, but if I kill somebody over it, the offense is still there. It might just be a knee-jerk reaction to be like, oh, just start from the beginning and just try to see. There are some interrogation techniques where I just let them continue to talk because they might give up some level of information that they might not have had they not just been rambling. Especially if he's already that nervous and he tends to ramble, let him do it. But that really, it's irrelevant to the investigation. I do like that he immediately comes. The first question I asked him was, so did you hit her? Like, because it's important. It's important to know. He's trying to figure out the specifics of the why. You know, why did the assault happen? In what order did the pushing happen versus the hitting? Because if he's pushing her a bunch and she feels like she's a small female, so hits her because she's nervous, maybe you can articulate the other way around. Still, to this point, I still feel like he's our victim. So, on what we can prove.
Pushed her to create some distance, obviously, right? What happened after that? What got the scratches on your eye?
The phone.
The phone. So you pushed her and she hit you.
She was. It wasn't like a push and she jumped on me. She was already. I don't want to. She was already swinging and I was. A lot of angles, a lot of nails, a lot of rings.
Yeah, you got 3 scratches in your neck. You got 1 on your left side of your nose. You got 1 in your face here, and you got 4 that are bleeding over.
And so we'll come back to now as I mentioned earlier when she mentioned she had her phone, or he mentioned she had her phone in her hand, of whether or not that could be considered a weapon. I mean,
and again, this is experience from Texas Penal Code. Weapons are in the manner of its use. Any object, my little Mandalorian mug, could be considered a weapon depending on how I use it. In the manner of its use is basically based on the way that I used it. Was it being used as a weapon or a utensil? There's a difference. A knife is only a utensil. It's not a deadly weapon by itself. But if I'm attempting to stab you in it, it's reasonable to believe that that object could cause serious bodily injury. That's the criteria in Texas for it. I'm pretty sure it's going to be identical to their situation. A phone, if it's being used now, and again, imagine a Nokia being crammed into your eye socket. In the manner of its use, that could cause serious bodily injury. Me chucking a phone at you could, again, give you a black eye, give you, again, protracted loss of limb.
It's like that story with the kid who threw the plastic toaster that you had.
Exactly. I had to take him to jail because it caused somebody else pain. Is normally a toy plastic toaster that weighs half an ounce a weapon? No. If a kid's holding a plastic toaster, I'm not going to point a gun at him because in the manner of its use, him holding it's not a weapon. And even honestly, if you chucked it at me, I'd probably like, okay, what's a half ounce plastic? It'd be inappropriate, and it would be police brutality for me to act that way. A rock is different. A very sharp stick is different because again, it's reasonable to assume. I don't have to wait till it hurts me. It's reasonable to assume based on the way that they're using it that it is. So the phone clearly caused him injury. It's not that he thought it would. It actually caused him injury. There is a small argument for aggravated assault in that, which makes this a horse of a very different color. And that's if it's just the phone. If there's keys, again, you could look at the rings on her hand as a potential. Because what's the difference between a big class ring and a knuckle duster? Nothing, or brass knuckles for anybody that's not initiated in that. It is accentuating the amount of damage I could do to somebody versus just my bare hand. An open-handed slap versus a punch can do a different amount of damage. A punch versus an elbow can do a different amount of damage. Me stomping on your head with the sole of my shoe versus just kicking you with my big toe, it's very different. And so there is a gray area, and it's how it's articulated. And again, the end result here is really what's more important. If I stomp at you, and it puts you in fear of that, it's a different charge than if I actually make contact with you and do some level of damage. If I'm rubbing the bottom of my foot on you, even though it's a very similar motion, again, it would only fall under offensive and provocative contact because rubbing can't reasonably cause pain. So like the courts do allow for the law to have some wiggle room and some gray area in articulating it, but the visible bodily injury is clear. So that's my hang up on this, is that regardless if she just happened to have the phone in her hand and be swinging at it, you might not go with aggravated assault because you're like, well, maybe she didn't intend to use the phone.
She might have been texting and just got...
Same thing with the rings. I'm not going to sit there and say you got ag assault because she used a ring and in the matter of its use it caused injury. She might have just had it in her hand and decided to punch
Now,
it.
a prosecutor might.
Again, you can have that conversation later. And again, let the lawyers in the comment section go talk about that. But ultimately, the intent was there to hit him. She verbally admitted to doing it. It caused bodily injury. The phone could be part of that, but still, I still don't have any other indication than to show that she was the aggressor in a domestic. We've established that it's his girlfriend. They do have a domestic relationship. Per Utah, any offense, including assault, under that circumstance would be considered domestic violence. And they do have a shall arrest policy on domestic violence.
So explain what shall arrest means.
So there is discretionary things, which is like, they'll use can arrest. I don't know what the verbiage might be. It's different depending on the state. Shall arrest versus like can arrest is very different. Shall means you will arrest. It takes the discretion out of it. If I see like an aggravated assault in progress, there is verbiage in the law that says the officer shall intervene in that. I'm not going to stand there and wait. I have an obligation by law to intervene in that thing. On a lot of situations, especially when it has to deal with like domestics, you'll see it sometimes when you have, what's it called? Like endangerment to a child. DWIs is another one in Texas where if I have probable cause for DWI, I shall arrest that person, even though it's a misdemeanor. Heck, domestic assault's a Class B, maybe a Class A, versus depending on what the type of assault happened. But it basically takes the discretion out of the officer's hands because they're trying to be an advocate for victims of domestic assault. They saw that there was enough issues with people suffering from domestic assault that they wanted to make sure that officers were taking enforcement action as advocate. It's basically the best way a lawmaker can try to be an advocate for victims. The whole aspect, the spirit of that law is to not leave it up to them. I don't want to put the burden of keeping the victim safe on the victim. We'll take that as the state. And again, a lot of times they'll still prosecute even if you don't want to for domestic assault. Because again, we don't know what the financials are. We don't know what kind of trauma that person's suffering from. We don't know if they feel trapped and they feel nervous that if they leave that something might happen. We as as the state are trying to, the nature of it, the way it's supposed to work, it doesn't often work this way, is that we are trying to advocate for them even when they can't advocate for themselves. We also on the back end tend to have like social workers that go and try to get them restraining orders, also try to get them help in leaving their apartments, getting jobs, moving out of state, moving out of county, stuff like that. And then helps them. We have pseudonym forms to protect their identity. They don't want that to kind of show up in documents. There's a lot of stuff that has to deal with domestic violence. It's a very serious topic. It's probably one of the most common calls that I as a municipal cop dealt with when I was still working. So it's important. But like I said, here, I think we have clear domestic assault. So I'd be curious to see how your guy talks him out of it.
Keep everything he just said in mind as we watch the rest of this video. Because it does make a difference there.
Alright, so it looks like 2 hands. Do you mind lifting up your right sleeve for me? I'm curious about something.
It's a little bit of nails. I suppose fingernails, but I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining about fingernails.
Fingernails tend to not leave marks past like a day or so they tend to be pretty fresh because they're very superficial. It's kind of like literally, you just take it to your skin, you push your little fingernail in there, you'll see an indentation, but your skin will recover from that. Real easy indicator, especially when we're looking for like strangulation marks. You might not get redness, but you might get fingernail marks in the back of the neck. It's a real easy indication to get a time of when the injury happened. Bruises could be there for weeks. That's obviously a fresh cut bleeding wound that's not scabbed over. Something else we'll look for, but that's also, again, still on the right side of his body where he was probably getting assaulted. This is further cementing that he's clearly assaulted. That injury didn't happen because he was hitting her in the arm. This injury probably happened from her putting her arm or her hands and her nails in his arm, which would reasonably cause pain.
Bruised or tender or anything like that?
No. Okay. I'm fine, and I love Gabby. I hope she doesn't have too many complaints about me. I'm just, I feel bad I had to get so public. I was just trying to be loud to listen. This is, I try to make her calm down and be like, look, everyone's watching. And I'm like, stop this.
Thank you.
I'm not saying he's not a weird dude, but nothing he said
or that anything about this relationship is healthy.
This is very clearly no, this is not normal. This should not be normal. If this is normal for you, please seek out help. Domestic violence is a very serious thing, and again, given the future of this instance, has very real consequences.
I got a quick question for you, Ryan. Do you take any medications or anything like that?
So this is still important for his DWI investigation. If he is taking something that means that he's not supposed to be driving, he could still have some creams. If he's really on the fence about whether or not he's got PC for an arrest, this might be a way for him to, I'll do this if somebody has, like it's real on the line, like I can't figure out who my aggressor, maybe it's mutual combat. But between domestics, it's a shall arrest thing. I got injuries on both sides of the fence. We might just see if the warrant ferry comes through in the clutch. And then I'm like, well, they got a warrant. I arrested them on the warrant, and now I don't have to worry about any further violence, and I'll let detectives try to sort it out in the back end, whether there was an aggressor or not, or who was the aggressor. He might be still possibly looking at that. Also trying to see if maybe there's some also other level of intox that might have adjusted what he said or exacerbated the situation. It's still not pertinent to the domestic assault, but might be more pertinent to his DWI investigation. I noticed he was going somewhere and thought, oh, maybe I should ask that question. Let me go ask real quick. So still good on the officer. I think he's doing a good job.
And I'm guessing he's saying his medications here, which is why this is probably redacted.
You don't take any medications or anything like that? Okay. Are you normally this kind of like hyper?
Do I see my heart rate up whenever the lights flash on? It gets your heart rate up. Do I see my?
Trust me, it does me too, and I'm the one posting it on. It gets me going a little bit.
You probably
too,
could say, "Hey, buddy," whenever somebody walks up.
So okay.
So he's probably picking up on how nervous this guy is, because again, you can see things in person that you wouldn't see on the body cam, because again, he's just getting you get a lot more detail, you can hear a lot more in his voice than what that
the world's worst mics can pick up.
So he might be picking up on something. You got to trust that to a certain extent, whether it's in your personal life or as a cop. You can pick up on certain things that, again, I can't see what his eyes are doing. His eyes might be darting around like crazy. His heart rate or his respiratory rate might be off the wall. You might see his just chest. He's not running. I didn't catch him off of a sprint or whatever, so why is he hyperventilating? Could also be if he was, this happens a lot when you're doing drug interdiction, if someone swallows the drugs that they had on them because they didn't want to go to jail, he might have a very serious medical situation going on that obviously if that's the case, we need to get him EMS and stuff like that. He might be detained for a crime, but I need to be an advocate for this person while I have him detained because I'm responsible for them. So it's a good question, actually.
No, I don't think so. No, none that I know of.
We're just kind of hanging tight for it.
So he's killing time here. He's probably running both parties just to make sure nobody's got any warrants or anything crazy like that. Perfectly reasonable, and it's not weird if nothing he asks here is important to the investigation.
Yeah, they're just kind of chit-chatting really right now.
Yeah. Might also be doing a CCH, which is a criminal history report. If he's got prior domestic assaults or she's got prior domestic assaults, that might weigh into his establishment of PC, but it also changes the charge. If you have subsequent domestic assaults, I think it becomes a felony. I have to look it up in Utah state law, but in Texas, a continuous domestic assault of the same party does accentuate that charge.
It gets upgraded.
Yes. But it takes time for all that to kind of get through. And especially if you're in a busier city, I don't think that's the case here, but you're having to wait in line because there's like 100 other officers trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, this is all just kind of backstory stuff here. Talking about like where they're going, where they're traveling, what they're doing. You know, it's a lot of just chit-chatting here.
See what Mr. Beard has to say. He's pulling him aside for power, which is normal.
He never saw the male strike the female. He saw the male trying to lock her out of the vehicle. She even told us that he was trying to lock her out, told her to go take a walk.
So pause.
So that she would.
So why would he be trying to lock her out of the vehicle? He didn't leave her there. He's just trying to lock her out of the vehicle. Let's ask that question. Let's ponder that for a second. Everything I know, bodily injury, she admitted to assaulting him. Nobody said that he assaulted her. He even said, didn't see anybody get hit. All he saw was him trying to separate himself from her. Indicative with him trying to push him away. What do we have here? That's circumstantial. That's not an offense to lock somebody out of a car. But it brings credence to this idea that she is the suspect in a domestic assault. But we'll keep listening to what Mr. Beard has to say.
Yeah, now he's reporting stuff from a witness.
Yeah.
So he
was trying to get in. She eventually couldn't get in and actually clawed her way in through the driver's door. He says, I don't understand why she's doing that. Well, I think it's because it was the only door that wasn't locked that she could get through. She's trying to get in over him. He's trying to disengage from her. I guess he hung her backpack on the back probably so she would have her shit so that he didn't have to engage with her. Everything she's saying is the same thing. I haven't heard what he said, but if that's what he said, it's also what the witness is saying. The witness says, I never saw him hit her. I saw him shove her, but I couldn't tell you if it was an aggression against her or a defense against her as far as her, you know.
And you also now have a third-party witness corroborating
point,
everything, which is good.
Unless the guy's screaming that he needs to go to jail and did something to this girl, it sounds to me like she is the primary aggressor.
100%.
Now, the problem with her being the primary aggressor is in an instance of domestic assault, be it a male or be it a female, we shall arrest. Now,
There it is.
it doesn't necessarily mean they have to go to jail. We can do a citation
Agreed.
if it meets one of three criterion, which one
Uh-huh.
of them is that we can ensure that they're not going to
They're going to be separated,
further
basically.
risk each other's safety. But the problem with that is they live in the same vehicle.
That's what I was going to say. The
Yeah.
other part of
So
it.
pause it real quick. So he walked through, and I give this officer clearly knows the law. This is not his first rodeo. He also doesn't look 12. I'm super jealous of his beard on duty. When I was still a cop and Gil was still a cop, we were not allowed. This is as best as we could do. It was just a little mustache. Which his was much nicer.
Yeah, you could see him in the early episodes.
Yeah,
of,
I was still clearly on duty, and
yeah.
I was still active because I had only my mustache. Now with my glorious beard,
Yeah.
clearly I don't work there anymore.
You'll also notice the sparkle in his eyes and
Yes.
the joy.
Yeah, I'm happier and
He's
all those
well
things,
rested.
yeah.
And
I only get periodic PTSD anymore. So he is just out loud chewing on what they got. And that's, she's the aggressor, clearly. There are some circumstances in which we can just issue the citation, not arrest, but he's poking holes in all the reasons as to why. And I can understand if you are convinced as an officer, it's a very big assumption to make, and not one that I think any officer wants to make, is to try to predict the future. He currently, Mr. Beard, is trying to figure out how he doesn't have to take this chick to jail because he believes that there is no possible further violence, or that she is not a threat to him moving forward, since she believes that she's the suspect, or he believes that she's the suspect. The problem with that is they need to be separated for the law to allow that. Utah law, we did look this up, Utah law does have specific, and I believe Texas law is similar. If I can know that there's no possible further, typically the arrest is done to prevent further violence, at least for a 48-hour period or more, or at least buying you enough time to have a judge give a court-ordered protective order. In Texas, it's an emergency protective order, which is done in a criminal case. A restraining order is civil in Texas, for anybody that wants to know. That's something that takes like 30, just like an eviction, it takes a long time to do. Because they live in the same car, or practically, and because they're out of state, they're both from Florida, it's highly unlikely that they got family. They haven't asked, but they have family or another place to go to. They're probably on limited means. These people are stuck with each other. They've already committed violence. Before officers interacted with them, they were clearly in a highly agitated state. They're still, even 20 minutes into this police investigation, in a relatively agitated state. How do I guarantee, as an advocate for the victim, which is the guy at this point, that no further violence occurs? This is the question they're being posed with. So we'll see how he navigates
See where
this
goes.
Yeah.